morning and welcome to Oddities, Authors, and Stories. I'm your host, Jessica Brown, and today we will be talking about James Baldwin. This is in congruence with Pride Month, and just as a reminder to all of our viewers, the thoughts and opinions that are shared on this program are not shared by the library or any of its staff. James Baldwin is a name that is familiar with both African American communities and the LGBTQ community. He is mostly famous for writing stories including Giovanni's Room, If Beale Street Could Talk, and the semi-autobiographical novel Go Tell It on the Mountain. He was also a powerful orator and essayist, having written a lot of essays and held a lot of debates during the rising civil rights movement at the time. During his time as a child, it was hard for Baldwin to grow up as a black man in the United States. It was even harder as a gay man. This was during a time where not only were the Jim Crow laws still in full swing, but in several states, homosexuality was criminalized. Like a lot of gay men at the time, Baldwin had to keep his relationships with men a secret, and this led to a lot of self-loathing, and he was prone to nervous breakdowns, and he did drink heavily during his lifetime. While Baldwin spent most of his life in New York, Harlem to be specific, a northern state that wasn't under the jurisdiction of the Jim Crow laws, he was still a victim to racial prejudice at the time. He viewed the racism of northern states as subtle and therefore more crueler than that of the blatantly written into law racism faced by Black Americans in the Deep South. He became so disillusioned that at the age of 28 in 1948, he moved to Paris, where he would spend 9 years of his life. And if you had tuned in to our Oscar Wilde oddity last June, it was mentioned that France had decriminalized homosexuality back in 1791 after the French Revolution. It also didn't hurt that France had abolished slavery a mere 17 years before the United States did. When he returned to the United States in 1957, the civil rights movement was starting to take hold. Baldwin would later become friends with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and attended the March on Washington in 1963. Though unfortunately, the civil rights movement wasn't exactly friendly to the gay community and their fight for equal rights, even if they were of the same color. A lot of this can be attributed to deeply rooted religious beliefs, something that Baldwin was very familiar with. His stepfather was a Baptist preacher, and they had frequently fought when he was a child. But it was especially a huge deal in Dr. King's circle, so much so that Baldwin was initially supposed to speak during the March on Washington, and he was unceremoniously dropped at the last minute. It's unfortunate this happened because it not only led to Dr. King having to cut off his friendship with Baldwin at the behest of other civil rights leaders, it also led to Baldwin rejecting the civil rights movement outright and denying that he was once even a part of it. Another thing that is quite revealing about this is that Baldwin didn't tell a lot of people about his relationships with men, and he had mostly tried to play it straight. And because of his involvement with the civil rights movement at the time, he was heavily investigated by the FBI. It is alleged that the FBI has over 1,800 pages of Baldwin's activities during his time in the United States during the civil rights movement in their files. When Dr. King was assassinated in April of 1968, Baldwin saw this as further confirmation that white communities in the U.S. could care less about people of color having equal rights. Several years prior, in 1965, when Malcolm X, another civil rights leader, was assassinated, Baldwin was beyond livid and blamed the press for giving a free platform for the white supremacy that allowed action like the Jim Crow laws to to be in place. In a slight reversal, when he was invited to King's funeral, Baldwin had chosen not to cry because, in his words, tears seemed futile at the time, and if I had begun to cry, I would not have been able to stop. 2 years after King's assassination, Baldwin would return to France, where he would spend the rest of his life. He had left sometime after the 1969 Stonewall Uprising in Greenwich Village, New York City, that galvanized the gay liberation movement. While he had no part in that movement, Baldwin was an important face of the gay liberation movement, thanks to works like Giovanni's Room. Baldwin passed away on December 1st, 1987 from stomach cancer at his home in France. He was working on an unfinished manuscript called Remember This House, which recollected all of his meetings with civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. The unfinished manuscript would serve as a basis for the 2016 Academy Award nominated documentary, I Am Not Your Negro. I suggest looking that documentary up, as well as any of James Baldwin's works. We Should Have, Go Tell It on the Mountain, and Giovanni's Room. Thank you for joining us for Oddities, Authors, and Stories. Next month we will be talking about a mystery writer and where she just disappeared. It's Agatha Christie. No mystery there. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you in July.